more on the average than those without that certification, and their skills and competencies are spelled out through these credentials. We are even seeing movements like STARS, skilled through alternative routes, popping up. STARS represent a group of employers who believe in the benefits of hiring those with alternative credentials. In other words, those without traditional academic degrees. Companies like Google, LinkedIn, Walmart, Chevron, IBM, Comcast, Goodwill, SHRM, and many others have signed on. So what am I doing here? Talking about generalities and telling you things you already know. Basically, I'm president and CEO of a company who does a fair amount of work in the certification field. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the work that we do as it relates to assuring that people who come through alternative learning routes are treated equally. Here's a quick overview of who we are. We are two companies that believe in underscoring and advocating for the dignity of work. I should also mention that we are accredited to the ISO IEC 17024 conformity assessment, which lay out the general requirements for bodies operating certifications of persons or individuals. Essentially, we provide national technical standards and assessment development, and you can see that the different companies focus on slightly different things. Nocti focuses on services to learners completing technical training programs, and NBS focuses on pre-employment testing for companies looking for individuals with validated talent and skill. As you can see from this slide, Nocti deals with things like micro-credentials, college credit recommendations. We deliver the workforce competency credential in almost 200 different technical areas. We deliver study guides, as well as professional development opportunities for those in education. On the Nocti Business Solutions side, we provide prior learning assessments for major companies and middle-sized companies. Among our marquee clients are Boeing and Hershey Foods. We also provide psychometric and data analysis services, as well as branded assessment delivery and scoring for different associations and trade groups. Customers tend to be separated by public education and private business. Those in the public sector include middle school, secondary, post-secondary, adjudicated, industry associations, teachers and administrators, as well as data professionals who work in the career and technical education field. On the Nocti Business Solutions side, we deal with privately held and publicly held companies. We certify for different organizations, folks like FANUC, the largest manufacturer of robotic three-axis arms, post-secondary schools offering prior learning credits, and workforce development centers around the country. Both Nocti and NBS work with trade associations as well, and employer accreditation groups. For those organizations, we provide numerous services, and some of those are listed here. Things like assessment delivery, things like psychometric services, delivering of micro-credentials, all sorts of other services that relate to standards and certification development. Our organizations have been working with folks at Credential Engine for a number of years. In fact, we were a founding partner when they were known as the Credential Transparency Initiative. In any case, their charge is to host a place where individuals of all stripes can view and compare different credentials. As part of the work, they have determined definitions of a number of credentials out in the field. And this is a listing of most of them, at least a majority. And there are main categories that can be recognized. One of them, you'll notice, is micro-credentials. Because the term micro-credential has been used a lot in education and workforce-related articles lately, it seems the definition is not entirely firmed up yet, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later in the presentation. So I've provided a lot of context and information so far, a light journey into why credentials are considered the current coin of the realm, a background of how our groups tie to that coin, and the products and services that we provide to both training institutions and to business and industry sectors. Let's refocus just a bit on the value of credentials and certifications to employers. If you notice under the heading of insightful training, there is language there that addresses expeditious recruitment and training time. All of these things affect any business's bottom line. And because we work in training and education sectors, there are benefits that can be had by that group as well. Both organizations know this quote by Christoph. There are lots of talented folks out there, but how do we get to them and how do they get to us? So how do we ensure equity and inclusion? Essentially, we are a digital company, though we still deliver paper-based credentials for incarcerated individuals and in some cases, adjudicated youth. We're about 97% online. So the best way to ensure equity and inclusion can be captured in just a few words. Transparent, supportive services. We believe in using the universal design for learning. The idea is to create a framework that is supportive to all learners. Because all learners are different, they learn at different speeds and in different ways. The barriers that we put up are usually self-created. We make the false assumption that everyone thinks like we do, and that simply isn't true. By making the assumption, we unintentionally shut out those who may not learn the same way we do. Let me give you an example of how this kind of thinking might or might not work in the physical world. Look at the first example and think about physical access to the building. Would a wheelchair even fit through the gate? And if it did, could it get up those steps? Though this site can be retrofitted, it clearly wasn't designed with all populations in mind. Here's a second example. I know you can't read the sign on the building from this slide, but here's what it says. So think not only about the emotional side, think about the practical side. After expending the effort to be able to get close enough to the sign, now you have to navigate to somewhere new. Really not an equitable situation. Let me move you to an example of how this kind of thing might play out in the digital world. Look at the first example. This is the start of a testing session for a certification credential. Let's say we are working with an incarcerated individual who has been studying their chosen field for the last 12 to 15 years, but they've really never been on a computer, much less taken a digital test. A better option may have been to present the test taker with a demo of the video first. How about a second example? In this case, a credentialing test has been converted to a test taker's native language, but unfortunately, the instructions have not been. All these examples simply mean that we need to think ahead when we do our design work, whether that's in the physical world or in the digital world. Let's look at one more slide that underscores the importance of designing with equity and diversity in mind. We looked into a more aggregated view of students in the CTE populations by accessing the U.S. Department of Education stats regarding CTE participants. Two important things from these stats. First, in round numbers, 3/4 of all high school students participated in some form of career and technical education. And secondly, 3/4 of those students receive special education services, and 3/4 of that population add English as a second language. This certainly indicates a variability of learners and learning styles that has to be considered. So what do organizations do? We plan for learner success. Here are a few of the ways that we do it. We show how the credentialing test is built by sharing the standards and the competencies learners are expected to master. We also share the importance employers place on each standard, so learners understand how to prioritize their learning. We provide study guides that help reinforce good study habits, and they provide practice study questions. And lastly, we provide pre-tests so that a baseline can be established and so that the learner has the opportunity to kind of try out their knowledge before taking a high-pressure version. And for those populations that aren't associated with a formal testing facility, or maybe not an educational setting, we employ remote proctoring services. Remote proctoring services allow some flexibility in that the administration option allows individuals to take an assessment basically anytime or anywhere. They could take them at their workplace, they could take them at their home, they can take them almost any place that's convenient to them and at a time that's convenient to them. They also provide a security option. By monitoring the site with a third party, we provide yet another checkpoint to assure that what's occurring is secure from both the learner's perspective and the transfer of data perspective. And lastly, this remote proctoring option is cost effective. An individual learner doesn't have to come to a site in order for a credentialing exam. We also provide a bit of content knowledge for our learners, something that we call micro-credentials. The concept has its basis in research. First, education is best delivered in small bites. Second, it makes sense to isolate key points when you're in a learning environment. And third, group information so that it's connected with other similar pieces of information. So when you think about retention and motivation, both are based on your ability to find relevance in the learning that you're participating in. So, for example, retention increases when a learner is in control or feels they're in control. Learning on demand is effective. And recognition for learning increases the motivation for further learning. Just so there's a bit of clarity around our definition of micro-credentials, we basically take one of our competencies that learners were having difficulty with, and we break it down into tiny parts. And then we create a video for each of those parts, and we add pre-test and digital badging so that those folks can be recognized for learning the skills and competencies of those particular components. So look what I've done. I've modeled an incorrect behavior regarding the universal design information that I just talked about. I made the assumption that this audience had the same knowledge that I had, which is probably incorrect. Let me try to clarify where these micro-credentials kind of grow from. You're looking at a sample of our retail merchandising credential standards. These are standards that national industry folks in the retail merchandising field have deemed are critical to minimal performance in that industry. Those same industry experts have also done a weighting and rating process that lets learners know what the most important standards are in their particular field. In this case, we focused on a standard that our databases of learners has had some difficulty with. That standard is customer service sales and selling. And industry experts that we've consulted with nationally have determined that that particular standard comprises 12% of the competencies that are in an entry-level worker's portfolio, or they should be. Those are things they would need to be successful in the industry. Those standards in retail merchandising are broken down further into what we call competencies. And those competencies that we focused on in this case, they basically deal with trying to explain the importance of positive customer relations. Most learners understand that customer relations are important in any customer-facing industry, but they don't necessarily understand the whys and hows regarding those customer relations. What do they do when they have an unhappy customer? What do they say when they're in a confrontation with a customer? Well, this micro-credential that focuses on the importance of positive customer relationships focuses on the concepts behind those relationships and what's important to understand about customer-facing positions. So we created a micro-credential entitled Handling Customer Complaints. We took that little competency and we broke it into 4 parts. 1, the cost of customer complaints. 2, reasons for customer complaints. And 3, the benefits of handling customer complaints. And finally, 4, procedures for handling customer complaints. So we thought we'd take you just a little bit deeper into the micro-credential piece because it's a term that people have a little bit of confusion with, and so we wanted to make sure you understood how we were approaching it. So I talked to you about the creation of the video components themselves, but what I'd like to do is just give you a sense of how these are integrated within our system. So at our 2 companies, we essentially have 3 components that deliver our content. We have a learning management system, an LMS, if you will. We have an assessment engine, and we also have a digital badging platform. We were around when digital badging first took hold with the Mayor Cities of Learning and the Lumina Foundation funding and all that kind of thing. So we've been into digital badges for quite a while, and we believe they're a significant force in terms of an ability for any educational entity to grant recognition for learners of any and all ages. And we've seen that played out through a lot of our data. Getting back to the systems and the integration, the learning management component is where the content of the videos are held, but that's not all that's held in that particular area. There are small pre-tests and post-tests that allow you to determine your level of knowledge with this particular piece of content. There are additional resources in the resource chapter. There are keywords, there are definitions, and above everything else, there's an opportunity to utilize this system on any platform, be it a cell phone or a mobile workspace or a laptop or a tablet or whatever needs the educational entity happen to have available. It can also be used in a number of different environments. It can be used as an assignment to give to students. It can be used as an individual learning packet. It can be used as a classroom demonstration component. Anyway, the second component is the assessment engine itself. This is where both Nocti and Nocti Business Solutions deliver their credentialing assessments. We also have the last component, which is our digital badging platform, which I kind of alluded to before, but this gives us the opportunity to recognize students for a matrix or a lattice, whatever term you prefer, of individual component skills leading up to a final credential. And if I could give you just a little bit more detail on the LMS itself, this is kind of the way it's broken out. It's in 3 phases. There's an orientation component, there's a content component, and then there's a resource component. In that initial introduction component, there is a pretest that gives you a baseline of what the students or what the learners know about a particular piece of technical content. And in the final resource section, there is a post-test to see if they've been able to increase their knowledge. The digital badging platform that I mentioned a slide or 2 ago also has the ability to function as a safe space for an individual to house all the competencies that they've gained. If you were to click on any of those icons of the digital badges that are exposed there, what you go to is something called metadata. And metadata is something that describes the skills and the competencies that the individual has. You can kind of think of it this way, when you take a cell phone picture anymore, there's metadata that's carried with each photo that you take. That metadata, for example, is things like the date that the picture was taken, the location where that picture was taken, both the city and state, but that city and state is based on a GPS location of the longitude and latitude of where that camera was actually used at that particular time. So think of the metadata that travels with digital badges as information about the learner themselves, information about how they acquired the digital badge, and what this digital badge represents in terms of competencies and how they fit into the grand scheme of the knowledge and skills that that learner possesses. Talked about a lot of things that our companies are doing, and we provided a lot of context. In terms of equity and inclusion, though, what should credentialing providers be doing? So let's go through a few of those things that credentialing providers should be doing in order to ensure that, the accommodations that they're providing to enable learners of all stripes are able to obtain credentials, which, as we know, is becoming the coin of the realm, as we've mentioned before. So in terms of the online administration, you can see from the screen there that one of the things that's critical is extended time. These administrations of credentialing exams can be lengthy, particularly for a learner who isn't used to sitting in that kind of environment for extended periods of time. I know some of the credentialing exams that we utilize and are utilized by partners of ours can be anywhere from 100 to 300 questions. And when somebody has to sit for that length of time, it's very difficult, particularly if they have an inability to do that kind of thing. So extending the time and even breaking the time into different sessions is really important. The whole idea of making sure that the learner isn't confused at all by what he or she is seeing on the screen is really important as well. One item per screen is really important to keep in mind, not a scrolling list of questions that they can easily get confused about, but one item on the screen. It stays there until the learner responds to it or passes it by, checks it, and intends to come back to it. But regardless of what the learner chooses to do with that particular question, it should only be presented in its singular form. Of course, text-to-speech options are really important. Text-to-speech options obviously mean that the learner needs to employ some sort of a headset so that only the individual that is taking the credentialing exam be the one hearing the questions. But that's a great way to help those who are unable to hear as well as others, or are affected by outside noise, that sort of thing. We also have integrated graphics and text, where if you scroll over them, they enlarge. You can see them if you kind of mouse over them. So that way, if you're unsure or if you're unable to see small detail, you can expand that detail so that you can see it with that enlargement tool. And on paper-based administrations, there are a couple of things listed there as well. We still do probably anywhere from 4 to 6% of our credentialing with entities that can't use a digital platform. So the options there for those who are unable to utilize small print because of difficulties with reading or whatever the case may be, we offer large print versions. Of course, we offer Braille for those who are obviously not able to see at all and have been trained in Braille. We offer extended time, which can be monitored by the proctors that are administering that exam, and again, multiple session testing, as well as individuals to read, which kind of is a physical format of the text-to-speech option. And these are just a couple of the things that that credentialing providers should be doing to make things more equitable for all populations. And just as important as making these changes is making sure that the people who are administering these credentialing exams and the learners themselves know what accommodations are available to them. So these things need to be not hidden. They need to be very obvious to the population utilizing that exam. So again, these are just some minimum things that we're doing. There's a lot of little detail kinds of things that that we are doing too to try to make things better, and we hope that everybody is taking that same approach. It's important to maintain an accessibility section too. In fact, consider making that the first thing that a learner sees, particularly in a digital environment. Because we used words evolving in our presentation title, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention experimentation occurring with things like AI and AIG and other machine learning engines. According to Forbes, there's a potential for increasing diversity with those tools. Debates about the efficiency and ethics of using AI when making decisions about hiring, promotion, diversity, equity, and inclusion have been going on for many years. There's even an AI Bill of Rights to protect vulnerable populations from unfair practices. When developing and used with intention, AI-powered technologies can be transformational tools for increasing diversity with businesses. AI must be combined with a commitment across the business to include a strategy based on data, which requires a full multi-pronged approach. Here are a couple ways Nocti is experimenting with these tools. Speech recognition programs' inability to understand many communities, particularly marginalized communities, is a pressing social and economic problem today. And ASR providers need to expand the amount of training data to build language models that have much more diverse base of speakers. Every dialect requires its own model. We're working with different AI voices to produce the videos that I just talked about in micro-credentialing. And we're using some AI research to automatically generate items. Subject matter experts still have to go through those automatically generated items, and things have to be addressed in terms of diversity and equity to make sure that they're effective. But this process can speed up the generation of different items that can be used in a credentialing certification process. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you for your time. And again, I'm very sorry that I wasn't able to join you in real time. However, reach out to the address shown on the slide here, or just nocti@nocti.org, and we can connect. Have a great remainder to the rest of your conference.
That was a great presentation. We were hoping that Dr. John Foster would be here to get or receive our questions and queries, more information. But still, like as we announced, we put his email in the chat here. You can directly reach out to him. I tried to send him a couple of emails last week. He replies in minutes. So we expected that. I mean, he replied to you back soon. At the same time, you can just send us your questions, your queries, if you want us, because we are developing like a full document to send it to him. in terms of feedback and queries. So as we announced, our second presentation will be starting sharp at 11. It will be led by Dr. Hyung Jung Yoon, the Associate Professor of Education and the Program in Charge for Post-Education Penn State, about reflecting on VR Enhanced T Group and feedback session, a path to DEIP. So please feel free to stay here, or you can move to the second track, go back to track one. The first presentation still is going on, which is coordinated by Tanya Wilson about DEI navigating alternative realities. So see you at 11 o'clock if you're still here. And still, like, you can raise your questions, send it in chat. Thank you very much.